Well, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me. I've learned so much from all these wonderful presentations over the last 3 days, and it's just been a great experience for me. So today I'm going to talk about nutsedges. The nutsedges are widely distributed plants of the genus Cyperus. This genus includes plants of great significance in world history, such as Cyperus papyrus, the source of papyrus. The principal nutsedges are Cyperus esculentus, Cyperus longus, and Cyperus rotundus. Modern botany clearly distinguishes these plants, but they were not so clearly defined in ancient and medieval times. Indeed, they are difficult to determine for modern botanists unless they have a complete root system. Thus, Dioscorides' description of Cyperos growing in Cilicia, Syria, and the Cyclades could be Cyperus esculentus or Cyperus rotundus, and perhaps even Cyperus longus. What these heterogeneous plants have in common is that the rhizome or tuber was the valued part. Cyperus esculentus is, as the name suggests, the kind most valued for its edible tuber, called variously chufa nut and tiger nut. The plant produces small tubers, the nuts, with a sweet flavor. It is cultivated in many parts of the world, notably Hispanic areas, where its tuber forms the basis of the original form of the beverage horchata, now often made with rice. Valued in ancient Egypt, its cultivation has continued into modern times in Egypt. But its cultivation is also problematic because it easily becomes a devastating weed, nearly impossible to eradicate. Even in antiquity, this property of Cyperus was well known, for Theophrastus writes, quote, "Of all plants it is the hardest to kill and troublesome to get rid of." Cyperus longus is the fragrant galingale, not to be confused with galangal, Alpinia galanga, a Southeast Asian plant related to ginger and turmeric. It is much taller than the other species of Cyperus and thus easy to distinguish. Along with Cyperus rotundus, it is a kind historically used in perfumery. Superficially, it is much more similar to Cyperus esculentus than the much taller Cyperus longus. And like Cyperus esculentus, its tubers are edible, though very bitter. Another Cyperus, Cyperus articulatus, was used as a fumigant in early 20th century Egypt. The ranges of these plants, either native or introduced, are extensive and overlapping, making precise distinctions in our analysis impossible, given the similarly overlapping ancient and medieval terminology. In general, if the tubers were eaten, it's probably a question of Cyperus esculentus. While if the use was pharmacological or perfumery, it was probably either Cyperus longus or Cyperus rotundus. Yet, as we'll see, Cyperus rotundus seems to have been consumed in early Islamic Iraq. The consumption of Cyperus esculentus tubers apparently goes back very far in time to the early hominins. Eating Cyperus esculentus continued into the Neolithic and early historical times, and from ancient Egypt it's attested from pre-dynastic and first dynasty sites onward. Egypt has been proposed as the place Cyperus esculentus became a domestic crop. Similarly, Cyperus rotundus has been excavated from Egyptian sites. The Linear B tablets from Pylos describe the making of perfumes in Mycenaean culture. One of the ingredients for perfumed oil was kouparo, clearly the ancestor of Greek kouparos. Along with such perfumes as wodoe, rose-scented oil, kouparoe, Cyperus-scented oil, was a basic variety of perfume in Mycenaean times. The large quantity of kouparo collected at Knossos suggests a significant industrial production of Cyperus perfume. Herodotus knows of the aromatic properties of Cyperus because he mentions that the Scythians used it in embalming the dead. Many Greco-Roman sources connect Cyperus with Egypt, reflecting the ancient role of Cyperus there. Plutarch includes it in his Kufi formula, for example. Theophrastus refers to an Egyptian tuber called nalinatale that resembles couperon. This was cooked in barley beer to sweeten it, and then it was eaten. Pliny speaks of the anthallium of Egypt with foliage resembling cyperus, which is then fire roasted and eaten. Both are identified with the chufa nuts of Cyperus esculentus. In Arabic, cyperus is sud, but the edible kind is also called haba zalam, grains of zalam. It's treated separately in pharmacological literature. It was first attributed to a mountain called Zalam in the Kurdish area of Jabal, hence its name, and Islamicate authorities regard it as a specialty of the region of Shahrazur in Jabal or Media. The particular interest in Haba Zalam is evidently because it was believed to be a potent aphrodisiac. It's curious that these writers do not associate it with other areas, as one might expect for Cyperus esculentus. By the early 12th century, Haba Zalam was being farmed in Al-Andalus, for Ibn al-Awwam gives a description of its cultivation in his agricultural manual. It is clear that he intends Cyperus esculentus, and this demonstrates the age of the cultivation of the chufa nut in the Iberian Peninsula. Islamicate literature knew of several principal sources for sud, Cyperus. Many are within the Darul Islam, but one important one was beyond in South Asia. Given the widespread presence of Cyperus within the modern Middle East, it's probable that the locations specified in medieval literature were those that had developed especially the production of Cyperus, rather than those where it was possible that it might be found. Let us first treat South Asia. The use of Cyperus as a foodstuff in South Asia was notorious, as we'll see from Al-Jahid later. The availability of Cyperus within the Middle East meant that the presence of the plant within India was known, but that it may not have been frequently imported. Ibn Sina, for example, mentions its existence in India, but does not explicitly say that it was imported. Al-Biruni, as one might expect, has more information on Cyperus in India. He knows the Indian terminology, and he quotes from a pharmacologist from Sistan in southern Afghanistan to the effect that Indian is the third best kind of Cyperus. Al-Biruni also quotes from another authority, ultimately based on Dioscorides, about a kind of Cyperus that produces a saffron-like color upon being chewed that depilates hair, and he's almost certainly referring to turmeric there. Other sources going back into antiquity, such as Pliny, also attribute hair-scattering properties to Cyperus. The pharmacologist Ibn Jazla remarks that the Indian induces a nosebleed, presumably because of the strength of its scent, and shaves the hair. Cyperus was a familiar plant for Ad-Dinawari, the great authority on the traditional botany of the Arabs. He classifies it as a root of pleasant scent and says that it is hard, black, rounded root looking like a knot. Cyperus rotundus is confirmed present in the eastern Arabian Peninsula and in Yemen, while Cyperus esculentus may exist as a, quote, introduced weed in eastern Saudi Arabia. Ibn Wahshiyya writes of the situation from the perspective of Mesopotamia, quote, this plant grows in wastes and ruins by itself, and no one ever has to undertake its cultivation, end of quote. Cyperus rotundus is well known from Iraq, but the flora of Iraq states non-committally that Cyperus esculentus might be introduced into our country. Ibn Wahshiyya's description of this plant evidently refers to Cyperus rotundus, as we shall see. Mesopotamia was a famous source of Cyperus, with Kufa the center of its production. More than a dozen perfume formulas given by the 10th century physician At-Tamimi in his collection call specifically for Kufan Cyperus. The author worked in Egypt, a notable source of Cyperus, so it's perhaps in the cases where he does not specify a point of origin for the plant, Egyptian is meant. Otherwise, Egyptian Cyperus is an ingredient in perfume only called for in a single formula of the early 11th century Andalusian Az-Zahrawi. Egypt certainly continued to produce Cyperus, with the 13th century Ibn al-Hashah claiming Egyptian as the second best kind after Kufan, with the Cyperus of Bust or Sistan in southern Afghanistan as the third best. In modern Egyptian, the tuber of the cultivated Cyperus is Hab al-Aziz, the grain of the dear one, supposedly because an ancient king was fond of eating it. Much earlier, Ibn al-Baytar, died 1248, had noted the equivalence of Habazalam with Habal Aziz, and it's probable that the aphrodisiac properties he described had a role in its dearness. The description of Cyperus and its properties by Dioscorides forms the foundation of the accounts of it in Islamic literature. Both Ibn Sina and Ibn al-Baytar, for example, quote it. The brief mention in at-Tabari's Firdaus al-Hikmah, the first Arabic medical compendium from the mid-9th century, merely notes that it is hot, dry, mild, dispels calculi, properties that are familiar to Dioscorides, who emphasizes its diuretic effect that works upon kidney stones. Other uses that Dioscorides mention are a treatment for scorpion stings, as an emmenagogue, and to treat ulcerative stomatitis. Dioscorides also discusses its use in warm emollients and for thickening unguents. At-Tabari does not mention Hab az-Zalam, only Sud. Ibn Sina adds many properties to his description of Sud. He notes that Cyperus improves the complexion and freshens the breath, two factors in its use in the perfumed cleansing compounds we will discuss later on. Ibn Sina also claims that it benefits putridity in the nose and mouth, looseness of the gums, as well as ulcerative stomatitis. Among the other uses of Cyperus in medicine, Ibn Sina claims that it improves the memory as well. Ibn Sina has an extremely brief entry on Habazalam, stating that it comes from Shahrazur and giving its properties, noting that it increased the production of semen, a property included among its aphrodisiac qualities elsewhere. As mentioned, Islamic pharmacological literature mentions Habazalam, the tuber of Cyperus esculentus, noting its sweet taste, but little is available on the consumption of it apart from the persistent reports of its use as an aphrodisiac. The 9th century Basran literature, Al-Jahid, mentions some of the characteristics of South Asian life, such as the famous Sindhi sandals, betel chewing, and the use of sandalwood. Included among these is the eating of Cyperus, and Al-Jahid, of course, was famous as an urbane and erudite Iraqi, and yet the practice of eating the tuber of Cyperus was evidently remarkable and exotic to him. This is striking, since Ibn Wahshiyya describes their consumption in the century following Al-Jahid's death. The Nabatean agriculture of Ibn Wahshiyya is a most curious and problematic source with a tangled and controversial history. The book purports to be a translation from ancient Syriac dating back thousands of years before Ibn Wahshiyya's time. When discovered during the 19th century, scholars initially claimed it as a work of genuine Babylonian literature, but soon identified the source as much later than the hoary antique period it supposedly came from. The book languished in neglect until the late 20th century, despite its immense value as a source for all manner of agricultural and cultural practices from Mesopotamia in the early Islamic period. The text also includes a great deal of information that comes from late antique Greco-Roman agricultural literature through the medium of Syriac. The role of Ibn Wahshiyya himself in the composition of the text lies somewhere between faithful translator and original author. Given his origins in the very rural social milieu from which the material of the text originated, it seems to me that we can take much of what he says about the subject of this particular paper as representative of the Mesopotamian practices of his time. For the topic of Cyperus, Ibn Wahshiyya's information is of considerable interest. He was primarily concerned with the process of rendering the tubers of what he calls sud palatable, and it led him into an exploration of bitterness and its removal from foodstuffs. Since bitterness is a characteristic of the Cyperus for Ibn Wahshiyya, it is evident that he mostly had access to Cyperus rotundus rather than the sweet Cyperus esculentus. Ibn Wahshiyya never mentions the term habazalam. Ibn Wahshiyya begins his account of Cyperus by noting the plant is not a crop at all, as we've quoted above, for it grew wild in wastelands. True to his words, his agricultural handbook offers no guidance on growing this plant, since one did not have to cultivate it. Being from Mesopotamia, a region famous for its Cyperus, this suggests that exploitation of Cyperus occurred mostly through gathering rather than through deliberate cultivation. He then describes the morphology of the plant in a way that could apply to different species of Cyperus. Most of Ibn Wahshiyya's account of Cyperus is taken up with procedures for preparing it for consumption, but he also includes valuable information on its use in perfumery, which we will analyze below. Ibn Wahshiyya describes how to make a bread from chufa nuts and grain flour. But to get the cyperus ready is a rather involved process of soaking it repeatedly in water, then mixing it with processed ground walnut and salt, and cooking it for 12 hours. Then it was mixed with olive oil and grain flour for making into a, quote, healthy bread with traces of bitterness and astringency that can be dispelled by eating it with butters and oils, and as breadcrumbs in broth cooked with fatty meat and oil, or by crumbling and pouring olive oil upon it first and turning it until the oil mixes with it. The olive oil and the shelled walnut and its oil, as we've described, dispel the bitterness and sharpness of these roots, end of quote. It's unfortunate that Ibn Wahshiyya does not define the proportion of processed cyperus meal to flour clearly. Probably he intends enough flour to make a dough that can be kneaded. His suggestions for consuming this healthy bread show that he thought it versatile enough to fulfill many of the functions of bread, eating as a loaf with condiments, crumbled in soup or crumbs that were sauced and eaten as a dish, evocative of modern fattoush salads with their crumbled bread. Ibn Wahshiyya also describes a sweetened version of this procedure with olive and sesame oil and honey. And then he offers another procedure for removing bitterness from comestibles in general by cooking them with salt, sugar, and vinegar in an elaborate procedure. Theophrastus, we recall, had Egyptian cyperus cooked in barley beer to make into sweetmeats, a procedure that would work for Cyperus esculentus, but probably not the bitter Cyperus rotundus. One senses that Ibn Wahshiyya is almost apologetic about the bitterness of chufa nuts and offers so much information on how to compensate for their bitterness as an apology. His insistence that the bread produced is healthy stands as a riposte to the objectionable qualities of the tubers. The surviving culinary literature from classical times almost entirely eschews the chufa nut in its recipes for foods. It is thus an unusual ingredient in the cuisine from classical Islamic times that is depicted in the cookbooks. This is not to say cyperus is rare in the cookbooks, for that is far from the truth if we go beyond foodstuffs. Cyperus appears regularly in compounds intended for cleansing and perfuming rather than edible dishes. Ibn Wahshiyya describes cyperus as a powerful deodorant. Quote, women may peel its roots, grind and mill them, and use them in perfume and the elimination of foul odors, because its roots are cleansing and useful against all the foul odors. For anything for which you want to eliminate its scent, rub it with roots of cyperus, and the scent will go away. End of quote. This folksy notice belies the role of cyperus in high-quality perfumery. While cyperus may be lacking from the fancy cuisine of Ibn Sayyar al-Warraq, 10th century cookbook author, for example, it was present in his compounds for cleansing and perfuming. And it's also present in the perfume formulas of the major authorities such as At-Tabari, Tamimi, and Ibn al-Jazar. These influential writers are part of the core of Islamic perfumery, and they typically call for the best ingredients. Not for them are the ersatz ingredients and compounds of the Kitab Kimia al-Itr, the book of chemistry and perfume, a work that, while it also calls for cyperus in some of its formulas, does not bother to tell anyone how to imitate this apparently commonplace and inexpensive ingredient. What types of perfumes used cyperus? It does not appear in the characteristically Islamicate musk unguents and incense pastes, but rather it was used especially in the scenting of oils and the making of scented powders. In the oils, cyperus contributes to the floral and herbal scent profiles desirable in them. We recall that the use of cyperus to make scented oils was more than 2,000 years old by this time. The common use of cyperus in scented powders calls to mind Ibn Wahshiyya's remark about its deodorant property. Last, but perhaps most importantly, the other role that cyperus fills in the art of perfumery is in the making of ushnan. This is a cleansing compound that was used upon the hands and face, and even in the mouth. It was present at mealtime and was used for the sake of hygiene and cleanliness, and its uses are described in the literature on decorum. In its original sense, ushnan was made with saltwort, which when burned produces alkali-rich ashes that have powerful cleansing properties, for they saponify fats. Many varieties are described in the formulas, and some have dispensed with the saltwort to become scented pastes based on such unlikely cleansers as beans, clay, mahlab, or rice in place of the saltwort. It is in the role of Ushnan that Cyperus makes its numerous appearances in the cookbooks. Ibn Sayyar al-Warraq, in his cookbook, discusses Cyperus separately and includes it in Ushnan formulas. The separate accounts of Cyperus shows that it was valued as a cleansing ingredient on its own and deodorizing ingredient, along with the saltwort powder itself and other ingredients such as camel grass. The author states that it, quote, can stop the bleeding in the gums and is also effective as a breath freshener. Using it regularly will strengthen the roots of the teeth. It cleanses the stomach and dissipates humidity, end of quote. Ibn Sayyar al-Warraq has 3 formulas explicitly called Ushnan, and all 3 include Cyperus. Later cookbooks also typically include Cyperus in their Ushnan formulas. Conclusion. The Nutsedges of Cyperus had diverse roles in early medieval Islamic culture. They are best known for their aromatic and deodorant properties and appeared in the perfumes and hygienic compounds used in polite society. Physicians used nutsedges in their compound medicines. Tracing the eating of the chufa nut is difficult in our sources. It is likely that Cyperus esculentus was consumed in Egypt, although this is basically invisible in our sources so far. The fact that it was eaten in ancient Egypt and also in modern Egypt in some rural areas suggests that there is a continuity in the practice. Perhaps it was not suitable for the high society that is most abundantly depicted in our written sources, or perhaps its reputation as an aphrodisiac obscured reports of its consumption. The situation is better for Al-Andalus, where the agronomical work of Ibn al-Awam describes the cultivation of the chufa nut, the ancestral practice of the modern cultivation of chufa nuts in Spain. The consumption of nutsedges as food is attested for rural Mesopotamia, and the emphasis on its bitter nature there suggests that the species involved is Cyperus rotundus. We would know little about eating chufa nuts in Iraq without Ibn Wahshiya's work. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Anya. Everyone, could you come back to the front and we'll have discussion? And I'll keep an eye, but maybe Anya, you can keep an eye if there's a hand on the...
I'll keep an eye.
Okay, so I was just going to take care of that. Okay, good. So are there any questions to start? Okay, yeah, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, please. Go ahead. Leonie, yeah. I'll bring you the mic, yeah. This is the... Thanks.
Thank you so much, both of you. I just have a really brief question for Ephraim. With the Judeo-Arabic prescriptions, do you often see or ever see numerals used? Because you mentioned the wahid and alif abbreviation, sometimes use the Judeo-Arabic. Do you ever see like numerals in the sense of signs for numbers used?
No. Okay.
No.
Letters instead of numerals, or if there were any?
Either.
No.
It's all written.
No number. It's always either written in Judeo-Arabic or in Arabic. And in Judeo-Arabic, sometimes they do the shortcut and just, Gimel instead of Talata.
Thank you. And then do you often see, because you mentioned the nafih, do you often see those in the prescriptions, like in the personalized prescriptions as well? Or was that just in that example that you had?
Just a second. I need to hear you without the echo. Go ahead.
Do you often see the nafih in the prescriptions?
Yeah, it depends. Sometimes there are few benedictions. Nafih inshallah is one of them. Sometimes it's written something in Hebrew, like with the name of God, and so on. And it depends, but there are about 4 or 5 ways to end such a prescription.
But it also happens in personalized prescriptions, because it happens in recipes that I look at all the time.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering, does it also come?
Yeah, in some cases, or let's say in most cases, sometimes in Hebrew, and so it's the recipe itself is in Judeo-Arabic, but the benedictions are Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. It sounds very, very Muslim, but it's a similar way the Jews start letters and so on. And you'll find the same on the take papers to the court and so on.
Thank you.
Okay, Isabel, please.
So thank you again from me, both speakers, and also my question is directed to Ephraim, because I think it's highly interesting, this library you try to reconstruct, and I've wondered whether you found also a special focus on eye remedies in this library, because when I was reading Xenonica Biblia in this hospital literature, I came over a corpus ascribed to a Jewish doctor named Benjamin, and it's in 4 or 5 manuscripts, and this is specialized on eye remedies. And so I think maybe you might have come over some similar things in your library.
Yeah, so I didn't talk about it, but of course you can learn about the main diseases that they had to deal with. So you can get it out of books, of course, but the vast majority of the notebooks are about eye diseases, which means that they suffered from this. And we know that the ancient Egyptian, and we know from Greek sources and from Muslim sources, because Egypt is, there is a lot of dust over there, and it's very close, and the sun is very direct, and the Nile is not that good when you go and swim and watch, and worms are getting into your eyes and so on. And also many books that have been identified are dealing with the eye problem. Like, yeah.
So this is very interesting in spite of these Jewish communities being not just in Egypt, but all over the Mediterranean. And so this might be another question, whether they were communicating Egyptian Jewish communities with maybe Greek or Byzantine ones.
Yeah. By the way, I had a PhD student from Japan, that came, and he was with me 1 year, and he wrote an article about eye recipes found in the Gnizda. So you can look it up. Yeah, so one article in Japanese and one in English.
I think I know the guy. I
Yeah.
think I know him from Glasgow. It might be that he was in Glasgow and also in Berlin last year, so I might know him.
Maybe.
I will Google this. Thank you so much.
Yeah, highly talented, but very shy. So.
Thank you, Ephraim, for your presentation, and for the audience to know we've known each other for 30 years, and let's say we followed each other quite well. I was struck by your reference to 414 substances in books and 278 in the prescriptions, and you seem to be surprised by that difference. I wish to bring to your attention that we have exactly the same thing in the Greek text. The Corpus Hippocraticum supposedly mentioned 380 plants, but half of the prescriptions in the entire Hippocratic collection is made out of 50 plants.
Yeah.
Dioscorides, the same thing. We have 1,007 chapters, supposedly corresponding to 1,007 materia medica, but it's not the case. The number of materia medica is much higher. But the most used substances are way beyond 300. And so we were wondering about that. And we have talked with ethnobotanists, ethnopharmacologists, and there isn't anybody who has been working on living oral tradition that knows of any group that uses more than 300 substances. So there is a thing here that a society apparently, even with writing, does not manage easily more than 300 substances. So that's some sort of medical number. But so here, I think that we have exactly the same thing. And there is a difference between what you learn and supposedly know, these are your years in college, and what you use, which is way beyond what you learned.
Below.
We're below, yes, below, sorry. And so I think that we have exactly the same thing, and I am happy that you came up with these numbers, because we have one more confirmation of this mythic number of 300.
Yeah.
So thank you for that.
Thank you. And of course, I mean, you can understand it because some of the books were written by Galen, Hippocrates, so on, 1,000 years before that. And some of the material, you know, you couldn't find them, and other maybe they decided they are not good anymore, and so on. And it's very interesting because all the ingredients that were mentioned in the prescription, I could find in list of their medica. So when you prescribe something, you know exactly if it exists or not in the pharmacies. So you'll not write something, you know, that is not there. And beside that, we know that the books were just to study from. In the Arabic medicine, you would write a prescription for a certain person on the right time. Depends not on the consequences, okay? It depends on the gender of the patient, on the time of the year, on his age, how much he weighs, and so on. And that's why these prescriptions were sent to the garbage or to the geniza later on, because it was good only for one person at a certain time. This is very, very interesting because it's like a personal medicine. Now we do it by genes, but then they did it. So you took all the knowledge that you studied and the knowledge from the books. The books were very heavy and long. That's why they wrote some good recipes in notebooks. And then when a patient comes to you, you prescribe him. You don't have time to go through Ibn Sina or El-Ghazi, you know, thousands of pages. So you keep some good recipes in your notebook, and later on, sometime, some of these notebooks became books. And so it's a cycle of transfer of knowledge.
I think Stefan Reif and one or two of those others at Cambridge would be a little tense for a moment hearing you with the phrase garbage organizer. But of course, that's exactly right. Yes.
Yeah. One of the books about the Geniza, I think, named something sacred garbage or something like that.
Yes. I wanted to add to this, there's possibly another approach to the same question that Alan raised, because after all, this trade continues to this day. There are herbalists now, and there are surely more recent lists, and it would just be interesting to know statistically how many products there are on more recent lists. Have you looked at that already or not?
Yes and no. What we have been doing is asking both theoretical botanists to make field work about traditional life traditions, not written down, and also talking with practitioners of herbs now. And so we have this number, let's say we have put 300 as a limit, let's say, to have some number somewhere. Particularly because with the Hippocratics, it was very clear. We needed to find a number somewhere. And so when we made this exercise on the Corpus Hippocraticum, half is made out of 50 herbs. Half of the second half is made out of, I don't remember exactly the numbers now, but it might be something like 150. And the second half of the second half is made out of 150, if I remember well. And these are exactly very specific prescriptions, and I go in the same direction as Ephraim, very specific pathologies, very specific circumstances, very specific places. And so I see it as Ephraim did, but also as a question of environment and doing something which is environmentally sustainable. not to use indiscriminately everything for anything. So it's the exact opposite of one fits for all. And so they personalize medicine in a certain sense.
I was just curious to think if I went to Bahar in central Athens now, or if I went to Baldwin's in London and looked through the list of herbs and spices and aromas that they had in stock, whether the number would be something like the same as that 300. Probably it would.
Most probably it will be closer to 50 than to 300. 300 is the maximum they can manage. 50 is what they say.
Yeah.
The best sellers, if you want.
The best sellers.
I can tell you, I wrote my PhD thesis about the medicinal substances of the medieval Levant from many historical sources. And later on, or meanwhile, I was doing with my colleague, Professor Zoranar, ethnopharmacological surveys. I mean, we started to buy things in Israel, in market in Israel, and then we saw that many things come from the Palestinian Authority, from Nablus, Shechem. So I went over there, and I spent the whole day buying things for the collection. And then we realized that there is a field of research named ethnopharmacological, and there is a journal of ethnopharmacology that we all know, so we publish it. And then we learned that many of the materials are coming from Jordan. So we went to Jordan. They didn't want to cooperate, but we went there by ourselves. Jordan is not a huge country, so we moved from city to city, in the markets, speaking with the people, buying things, and then it turns out, very interestingly, that at northern Jordan, we found things that are coming from Syria and Iraq. And southern Jordan, things that are coming from Yemen and Egypt, and even the names are more Egyptian and Yemenite. And we wrote an article about that, about the ethnopharmacology of Jordan, and we have a collection. And by the way, it was all, we took photographs and we gave it to the welcome library. And you can download it and use it in your publications and so on. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Other questions? I have one. Anya, can I ask you a question quickly about the two things. One is about the use of cypress in perfumery outside of early on outside of say Egyptian and Cretan perfume recipes. Have you seen anything from Mesopotamia that's quite as early? Has there been any attempts to identify it there? And the other question is about the use of cypress as a deodorant. I'm really interested in what kinds of things are used to treat oil in order to make it kind of usable as a perfumery substrate. And you mentioned that there's a deodorant property to cypress that's described. And does anyone in your sources make the connection between that and its use in initial stages of oil preparation? Is it something about deodorizing the oil and all like that, or is it simply to add a layer of pleasant scent? Because they're not exclusive, so I'm just wondering if there's the other thing mentioned as well.
Okay. In answer to the first question, I'm not sure about Mesopotamia. I'm running into terminological problems, whether we're dealing with cyperus or rushes or sedges in general. So I'm not totally sure yet whether we're dealing with that. I'd love to have a cuneiform specialist who could set me right on these matters. On the second thing, yes, I think it's clearly part of the deodorization of the oil that makes cyperus something that was cooked in these stages of oil preparation. Yeah, so I think that's spot on. But there are other ingredients used in conjunction with it. So maybe let's think not just deodorizing and making it neutral, but deodorizing it and replacing it with this more violet floral-like scent associated with the cyperus.
Super, thanks so much. Any other questions from the audience? Anyone online? If not, then perhaps if there's, and would you like to say some words to close the event then? And let's just thank this panel for a wonderful end to the last session. Thank you.
Thank you. My Janek and social media. Zosieńka, William, Łączył, Janek. So, you know, all good things must end, and this is the conclusion of the conference. But with conference, it is that it can be repeated, and hopefully you will accept our invitation for next, so the 7th edition of Colloquia Ceranea. And hopefully also when we turn to you, for instance, to come to us within another program we call Horizons of Humanity, or Humanism rather, for lectures. So hopefully we will see each other quite often. Exactly, Sean, we just wanted this, event brought us together and had a tendency to grow, yeah? It shouldn't be something like an enormous congress of people that read the presentations and do not care about what others say. But this should be something like a hub of exchange of ideas. And I think it has started to play such a role. And if you perceive the same way, so we are happy. What I gather is that it was really a forum of exchange, but it was also a forum of exchange of informal things. Like, for instance, that you were having a good time, and hopefully, as Sean mentioned, also food was not that bad, but was agreeable for you. I hope the living conditions were also quite agreeable. At least we tried to do it very, very hard. You know, I'm the head of the conference. We cooperate quite closely with Krzysztof, but especially with Jan and especially with Zosia. So, you know, that formal doesn't mean always practical. Of course, I had my contribution all the time, and you can, like, say yes.
Yes, you have.
However, so let me express my deepest gratitude to Zosia and Janek for what they have done, and this is invaluable, and I think that everyone can see. So may I be informal, Zosiu? Jan as well. Dziękuję. Krzysztof as well, and to everyone. But this is the participants create something like atmosphere, and they give something like an opportunity to real exchange of everything. So I just have to, at the very end, say that, of course, I'm very grateful that you wanted to come, that you were open enough to accept our invitation, that you were knowledgeable enough just to present everything you wanted. And let's hope that with time, we'll be able to meet, exchange, and something else will happen. So there will be something like synergy of all activities we carry out all the time. And hopefully someday, maybe not this year, maybe not next year, maybe in 3-5 years' time, we'll be thinking together about something like a very joint project. Because we've been working for sometimes very long time on almost the same things. But, you know, other people, they do not know how important it was and how important it might be for the future. Because I wouldn't say that, for instance, those people that lived 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago were more stupid than we are. And they were less competent than nowadays pharmacists or doctors. Maybe it's time to say to the world that it would be wise to use like competence and experience of former generations for the benefit of the future. So let's think about this together. And the last word from me, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you. You're so open and brave that you came. And it is true, it is the participants who made the conference. It is you who made it such a great event. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry to take again the microphone, but I take the liberty in the name of everybody here and also all those who already left to be extremely thankful to the organizing committee, Dosha, of course, all the emails we received, Jan also constantly present, and our colleague, Professor Kokoschko, who cared for everything for us. Not only the science and the opportunity to have this exchange of ideas, but also for the food or comfort, and even for a free tour of Łódź. So we cannot thank you enough for that. More practically now, I return to the idea, which I understand has been accepted, of publishing the text in the cell, yes, and so it is my understanding that we'll exchange emails among us, and then you receive email from Professor Kokoschko and or Dosha, let's say, to see how we can concretize this publication of the proceedings. And of course, I'll be happy to help as much as I can, but I will never be able to do it as much as the team here did for us during these days. So thank you, and thank you.
You're welcome, Professor. So have fun, of course. There is some food left. If you want to enjoy, just please. I will have to excuse you because I've got some, say, family duties just to fix, and I'll be leaving in like approximately half an hour. So I just wanted to say goodbye to each and every of you and invite for the next edition. So have fun.